The city lights of Earth spread below her like a chaotic mosaic, a far cry from the sleek, gleaming landscapes of her homeworld. Lyra sat alone in the tiny, dim apartment assigned to her as part of her punishment, a consequence she still found hard to accept. She could hear the low hum of humans passing on the streets below, their voices rising in laughter and argument, their footsteps echoing up the narrow alleyways. It was all so raw, crude. And yet, as she closed her eyes, the unfamiliar sounds stirred something within her, a strange mix of resentment and curiosity. She glanced at the ancient, bulky device beside her. An intercom, they'd called it, though its buzzing made it seem barely functional. Earth technology was decades, even centuries behind her own. She had to remind herself that everything here was inferior. Her own exile was meant to be humbling, a harsh contrast from the brilliance of her world. But the longer she stayed, the more these strange human sensations gnawed at her mind, teasing her with their simplicity. A loud knock on her door broke her thoughts. Lyra's eyes snapped open, her gaze darting to the door with an instinctive wariness. She wasn't expecting visitors. She approached the door, her senses keenly aware of every creak in the floor. "Who is it?" she called, her voice smooth but tinged with irritation. "It's Ethan. You probably don't remember me. We met last week? In the bookstore?" The voice was familiar, a soft, earnest tone, colored by a hint of awkwardness that she remembered well. Ethan, the human. He'd asked her about a book, The Stars and Shadows, and had gone on to chat about some human concept called fate. Strange, but she remembered feeling oddly compelled by his openness, even if she'd brushed him off at the time. With a sigh, she unlocked the door and opened it a crack, keeping her expression neutral. "It's late, why are you here?" Ethan shuffled his feet, clutching something under his arm. He wore a thick, worn-out coat and had a sheepish smile. I thought you might like this." He held out a book, its cover faded and corners worn, clearly well read. "It's a story about someone who's a bit lost. I thought, I don't know, maybe you'd like it." Lyra's eyes flicked to the book, then back to him. A surge of irritation flared within her. Why did he assume she needed comfort? But as her gaze lingered on his face, she caught an earnestness that disarmed her. "Fine, I'll take it." She reached for the book, her fingers brushing his as she did, and something in his eyes changed, a flicker of recognition or maybe curiosity. She quickly pulled her hand back. Ethan, sensing her discomfort, gave an awkward laugh. "I'm sorry. You probably don't get a lot of people dropping by unannounced." "Not exactly, no," she replied coolly, glancing at the cover. "Thank you. But why did you bring it?" He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. You seemed lonely. Or at least, kind of new around here. Thought you might like a friend." The word hung between them, heavy with implications. A friend. Something Lyra had long considered irrelevant, frivolous, even beneath her. Friends were for people who sought attachment, and attachments only led to weakness. But Ethan's gaze was disarmingly sincere, devoid of the complexity and agenda she was used to on her own planet. After a pause, she nodded slowly. "Fine, you can come in, but just for a few minutes." Ethan's face brightened as he stepped inside, eyes wandering over the bare walls and minimalist furniture. "Wow, you keep things really tidy," he murmured, taking a seat on the couch. "It's practical," Lyra said, crossing her arms. "Nothing more. Humans seem to clutter their homes with unnecessary things." Ethan laughed, a sound so warm that it took her off guard. "Yeah, we tend to hang on to stuff. Memories, you know. I guess. Sometimes we need reminders of who we are." Lyra tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. Memories are stored in the mind. Objects are irrelevant. "Maybe," Ethan said thoughtfully. "But sometimes objects help us remember feelings, not just facts, like this book." He patted the cover. It's a reminder of what I felt when I read it, not just what's in it. You know what I mean? She considered this, a faint crease forming between her brows. Feelings were fleeting, often unreliable. Facts were truth. Emotions were mere distractions. But something in Ethan's expression told her he valued these strange tokens, these fragments of humanity. As silence settled, she turned the book over in her hands. You speak as though feelings are more important than truth, she said slowly. Why? Ethan smiled. Maybe because sometimes feelings are our truth. They're what make life worth it, I guess. Lyra felt her chest tighten, as if something elusive was just out of reach. And what is worth it? She asked, almost a whisper. Connection, he answered simply, knowing you're not alone in this crazy, unpredictable world. The words hung in the air, almost a foreign language to her. Connection, not being alone, concepts she'd long dismissed as irrelevant. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she felt the faintest tremor of doubt. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to this human notion of connection. But she quickly brushed it aside, straightening her shoulders. Thank you for the book, she said a bit tersely, but I'm fine on my own. He held her gaze unflinching, his tone gentle. You don't have to be. The simplicity of his words hit her like a wave, unsettling her usual composure. She felt an inexplicable urge to step back, to retreat to the safety of her solitude, but something rooted her in place. Perhaps it was his unwavering kindness, or the strange allure of his humanity that she couldn't fully understand. Her voice faltered for a moment, a rare crack in her armor. She forced herself to look away. You should go. It's late. Ethan nodded, sensing the subtle shift in her tone. All right. But if you ever want to, I don't know, talk or something, I'm just a few blocks away. He gave her a small, genuine smile before stepping back toward the door. And hey, take care of that book. It means a lot to me. She watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving her alone once more. But the silence felt different this time, less like the solitude she was used to, and more like an emptiness she hadn't noticed before. Lyra sat back down, staring at the worn cover of the book. A wave of unfamiliar feelings surged within her, questions and doubts she couldn't quite name. Why had his kindness unsettled her so? And why did his words linger, echoing in her mind long after he'd left? As she traced her fingers over the faded title, a single thought surfaced, one she hadn't dared consider since her exile began. Maybe, in this strange, chaotic world, she wasn't as alone as she believed. The days passed in a steady, quiet routine after Ethan's visit, yet Lyra found herself unable to shake his words. The worn book he'd given her sat on the table, a constant reminder of their strange conversation. It was foolish to let his ideas cling to her thoughts. She was here to observe, nothing more. And yet she felt the inexplicable urge to understand why a simple human's kindness had unsettled her so deeply. One evening, after an uncharacteristically cold earth rainstorm, there was another knock at her door. This time her heart skipped. She wasn't used to expecting anyone. She reached for the door, hesitating before finally opening it. Hey! Ethan greeted her with a sheepish grin, shivering slightly under his damp coat. I realized I left my gloves here last time. Mind if I come in for a second? Lyra raised an eyebrow, fighting back a smirk. You were only here for 5 minutes. Yeah, and somehow managed to lose something in those 5 minutes, he replied with a shrug, smiling despite the water dripping from his hair. With a slight sigh, Lyra stepped aside. Come in, but don't touch anything, she said, her voice laced with faux irritation. Ethan grinned, stepping inside and glancing around her bare apartment. Trust me, I'll keep my hands to myself. His gaze settled on the book she had left on the table. Oh, you're actually reading it? He asked, his eyes brightening. Reading would be a stretch, Lyra replied, crossing her arms. I've skimmed it. Skimmed? What did you think? he asked, ignoring her sarcastic tone. Did you like any part of it? Lyra hesitated, feeling as though admitting anything positive might encourage him. It's strange. The character, the protagonist, he's constantly conflicted, torn between two lives. He doesn't even know what he wants. Maybe that's the point, Ethan said with a thoughtful nod. Sometimes it's about the journey of figuring out what you want, even if you don't know it yet. Lyra scoffed. Human lives are so short. Why waste time on journeys that might lead nowhere? Ethan chuckled, wiping a hand through his damp hair. That's true, but maybe it's because we know our time is short that we cherish the journey. He looked at her with a sincerity that made her feel exposed. Have you ever had a moment that made you feel alive? Lyra's gaze wavered. The question was simple, yet it seemed to dig into something within her she wasn't prepared to face. Alive? She echoed, stalling for time. Existence isn't a feeling, it's simply there. Ethan tilted his head, watching her. Existence can feel empty unless you give it meaning. Sometimes even a small connection, a single person, can change everything. She felt her breath catch. He didn't know her secret, the reason she was here, but somehow his words were like an arrow finding its mark. She tried to shift the conversation. You're quite the philosopher for a man who lost his gloves in 5 minutes. He laughed, his cheeks flushing slightly. Touché. Guess I just get curious about people, especially new friends. Friends? She raised an eyebrow, a mixture of confusion and skepticism clouding her expression. Yeah, he said, undeterred by her reaction. Friends. It's a simple human thing, really. Just two people who enjoy each other's company, who'd rather not be alone. He shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a long moment, they stood in silence, his words hanging between them. Lyra could feel the faintest stirring of something, an echo of a warmth she didn't recognize, something tugging at the edges of her guarded heart. But the rational side of her took over, reminding her of her purpose here, her mission. Friends, after all, were for those who had no exile hanging over their heads. Enjoying each other's company isn't a luxury I can afford, she said quietly. Ethan's gaze softened, his expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper, a quiet understanding. You know, sometimes it's okay to let yourself enjoy things, even if it's just for a moment. She looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze, but his words stayed with her, embedding themselves like seeds. And then what? She challenged, her tone colder than she intended. When that moment fades, when everything you've allowed yourself to feel is just gone, then you live with the memory, he replied gently. And maybe those moments add up to something bigger. She felt her resolve weaken, her heart wavering. Ethan's way of seeing the world, so full of hope and simplicity, was foreign to her, yet painfully alluring. His kindness was like an open door to a world she hadn't known existed. She clenched her hands, feeling as though she were standing on the edge of something vast, something dangerous. Look, he said softly, breaking the silence. I don't know what you're dealing with, but if you ever need a break from all this, he gestured vaguely at her sparse apartment, I know a place, somewhere quiet, away from whatever might be weighing you down. The offer lingered, hanging in the air between them, fragile and precious. Lyra's voice came out barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this? Ethan's gaze was steady, his tone sincere. Maybe because I think we all deserve a little kindness, even if we don't know why. The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than anything he had said before. Kindness without motive, without expectation. Was such a thing even real? On her planet, kindness was currency, something given with conditions attached, obligations woven through every action. The thought alone made her chest tighten. I don't understand you, she admitted, her voice softer now, laced with a vulnerability she hadn't meant to reveal. Maybe you don't have to, he replied, his tone warm and reassuring. Maybe sometimes it's okay not to understand. Just to feel. They lapsed into silence again, but this time it felt different, comfortable, almost peaceful. She found herself lowering her guard, inch by inch, as though the quietness itself was somehow eroding the walls she'd built around herself. Finally, she glanced at him. "Show me this place." Ethan's face brightened, his surprise quickly melting into a pleased grin. "All right. It's not far. We'll walk. It's better that way." Moments later, they were strolling through the winding streets, the rain-soaked pavement shimmering under the streetlights. The city's nighttime hum enveloped them, a muted symphony of voices, laughter, and distant music that made the world feel strangely alive. Ethan led her through an alleyway, across a small bridge, and down a path lined with quiet trees. When they arrived, Lyra could hardly believe her eyes. They stood on the edge of a small park, hidden from the noise of the streets. The city lights reflected off a calm lake, casting a soft glow that shimmered across the surface. Above, stars peeked out through the clouds, faint and distant but unmistakable. "This," Ethan whispered, looking out at the view, "is my favorite spot in the city. Whenever things get too overwhelming, I come here." Lyra's gaze softened as she took it all in. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of rain and earth. "It's beautiful," she admitted, almost reluctantly. Ethan smiled, his voice barely a murmur. "Sometimes, even in the middle of all the chaos, you find a little peace." They stood side by side, silent, each lost in their own thoughts. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra felt a strange calm settle over her, a sense of belonging that was fragile yet undeniable. "Thank you," she whispered, surprising herself with the sincerity of her words. "For showing me this." Ethan glanced at her, his expression soft and knowing. "You're welcome, Lyra." The sound of her name on his lips sent a ripple through her, an unexpected warmth that made her feel seen, truly seen. And in that moment, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could let herself be a little vulnerable, just this once. But just as she felt herself lowering her guard, a sharp movement caught her eye. In the shadow of a nearby tree, a figure shifted, a silent observer watching from the darkness. Her heart leapt, her instincts going on high alert. She tensed, subtly turning her body to block Ethan's view. "We should go," she said, her voice now clipped and tense. Ethan looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," she replied, her tone brisk. "It's getting late. We should go back." He opened his mouth to protest, but then noticed the sudden tension in her eyes. Something flickered in his gaze, a hint of worry, but he nodded and turned to leave. As they walked back, Lyra's mind raced, her thoughts darkening with a sense of dread. She knew that figure in the shadows, knew what it meant. Her exile wasn't just about observation, she was being watched, monitored by those who would report any sign of weakness or disobedience. And she'd just given them exactly what they were waiting for. The figure in the shadows haunted Lyra's thoughts for days. Every quiet moment felt like an invitation for them to appear, watching her, judging her. She moved through her days with a heightened awareness, every sense alert to the possibility of more eyes on her. And worse yet, Ethan, in his gentle human way, seemed to notice. He didn't ask, never pushed, but his concern was palpable, lingering between them like an unspoken question. One evening, as they sat together on the bench near the lake, Ethan turned to her, his gaze soft yet piercing. "Lyra," he began, his voice gentle but steady. "Something's been bothering you. I can see it. You don't have to tell me everything, but maybe I can help?" She hesitated, words catching in her throat. Trust was a foreign concept, a risky proposition that could spell disaster for them both. Yet, looking into his eyes, she felt a rare urge to tell the truth, to let him into her world, if only for a fleeting moment. I'm not just an outsider here, Ethan," she began carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm watched. They call it exile, but it's something closer to imprisonment. If I make a mistake, if I break even a single rule, they'll know." Ethan's brow furrowed as he absorbed her words, the weight of her confession sinking in. "Who are they?" "My people," she replied, her voice tight. "They sent me here to observe, to learn, but they also want to make sure I don't connect. Emotions, attachments, they're weaknesses to them, things that keep us from our purpose." Ethan's expression shifted, a storm of emotions flashing across his face. "So, that's why you were so reluctant to let anyone in? Why you always seem like you're holding something back?" He paused, looking down at his hands, his voice raw. "But why did they send you here at all?" Her throat constricted as the memories resurfaced, the familiar pain creeping into her voice. "I broke one of our sacred laws. I questioned authority. I believed that maybe our ways weren't the only ways." She hesitated, feeling the weight of her past pressing down on her. "And now, I'm paying the price." Ethan's eyes softened, his hand reaching out to cover hers. "And here I thought you were just shy," he murmured, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "But Lyra, if connecting is forbidden, why are you still here with me?" She looked at him, her heart pounding as her gaze lingered on his hand, warm and steady against her own. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice betraying a vulnerability she couldn't hide. "Maybe because you made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time." A silence fell between them, heavy with words left unsaid. But before either could speak, a soft rustling in the bushes nearby broke the quiet. Lyra's head whipped around, her senses prickling. She recognized the sound. It was the same as the night she'd spotted the figure in the shadows. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice tense. "We need to leave. Now." He glanced at her, his face a mask of confusion, but he didn't argue. They rose from the bench and began walking quickly, their footsteps silent against the soft grass. But they hadn't gone far before a figure stepped out from behind a tree, blocking their path. Lyra's heart pounded as she recognized him, a sentinel from her world, his cold, expressionless face a chilling reminder of the life she'd left behind. "Lyra," he intoned, his voice devoid of warmth, "you have broken the terms of your exile. You were warned about human attachments." Ethan's hand tightened around hers. "Who is this?" he whispered, his voice edged with alarm. She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the sentinel. He's one of my people." The sentinel's eyes flickered to Ethan, his gaze icy. "And this human? Is he the reason you've forgotten your duty, Lyra?" She straightened, her pulse racing. "I haven't forgotten anything," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "But I refuse to ignore what I've learned here. Maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's what makes us stronger." The sentinel's expression hardened, a trace of disdain flashing across his face. "You have lost your way. Emotions, attachments, they are distractions, corruptions. You are no longer fit to continue your mission here." Ethan stepped forward, his jaw set. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice calm but defiant. The sentinel's gaze shifted to him, a flicker of irritation breaking through his cold exterior. "You have no say in this, human. Lyra belongs to us. She is bound by our laws." A silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Lyra could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her, a choice she could no longer avoid. She looked at Ethan, his face taut with concern, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and the sentinel. "I may belong to your world," she said, her voice strong, "but I have the right to choose my path, and I choose to stay." The sentinel's eyes narrowed, his voice laced with contempt. "Then you have sealed your fate." Before she could react, he raised his hand, a device glinting in his grip, aimed directly at her. Ethan lunged forward, his arm wrapping around her protectively, but the sentinel's cold gaze never wavered. "Lyra!" Ethan cried, pulling her back just as the device released a pulse of energy, missing her by inches. They stumbled backward, the air thick with the charged tension of impending violence. "Run," Lyra whispered urgently, tugging at Ethan's arm. "We can't fight him here." They turned and sprinted through the park, the sounds of the sentinel's footsteps echoing behind them. Her heart pounded, the fear and adrenaline propelling her forward as they weaved through the trees, the sentinel's relentless pursuit close behind. Finally, they reached a narrow alleyway, ducking into the shadows and pressing against the cold, damp wall. Lyra held her breath, her mind racing, knowing their options were dwindling. Ethan looked at her, his face pale but determined. "We can't keep running. What's the plan?" She glanced around, assessing their surroundings. "There's an old facility on the edge of town. It has an energy field, a dampener that could interfere with his tracking. If we can get there, we might have a chance." Ethan nodded, his gaze fierce. "Then let's go." They moved quickly, the city's quiet streets lending an eerie silence to their escape. The facility loomed in the distance, a dark, hulking structure nestled against the edge of the forest. They slipped inside, the building's abandoned halls echoing with their footsteps as they navigated the maze of corridors. Finally, they reached the central chamber, the air humming with the faint energy field that pulsed through the walls. Lyra turned to Ethan, her gaze resolute. "This is it," she said softly. "If we can hold out here long enough, he'll lose our signal." But before they could settle in, a shadow appeared in the doorway. The sentinel's figure loomed, his gaze cold and unforgiving. "There is no escape, Lyra," he intoned, his voice like ice. "You cannot evade your fate." Lyra squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze with a fierce determination. "I may not be able to escape, but I will not go back without a fight." The sentinel's expression hardened, and he raised his device once more. But before he could act, Ethan lunged forward, grappling with him, their struggle sending the device clattering to the floor. "Go!" Ethan yelled, his voice strained. "Get out of here!" Lyra hesitated, her heart torn, but she knew that leaving was their only hope. She grabbed the device, turning it on the sentinel, sending a shockwave of energy that flared through the room. The sentinel collapsed, his form crumpling to the ground, and she ran to Ethan, pulling him close as they both caught their breath. As the silence settled around them, Lyra looked into his eyes, a bittersweet realization dawning. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You risked everything. For me." Ethan smiled, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It was worth it," he murmured, his gaze warm and unwavering. "Because you showed me something worth fighting for." They stood together in the quiet of the facility, knowing that their choice had changed everything, and as the dawn broke over the horizon, Lyra felt a new sense of freedom, a chance to forge her own path, for the first time, with someone by her side. The transmission pulsed through the void like a heartbeat, faint but deliberate, each thrum laced with an urgency that could not be ignored. Aboard the ardent horizon, Dr. Mira Solis sat hunched over a console, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across her face. The encrypted signal had been circling the galaxy for years, slipping unnoticed through the tangled chaos of interstellar chatter, until now. The sound was haunting, not words, not music, but something in between, a melody woven from sorrow and desperation. Mira replayed the fragment, her fingers hesitating above the controls. She couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't merely a distress call. It felt like something far older, far more personal. "It doesn't make sense," Mira murmured, breaking the heavy silence of the observation deck. "What doesn't?" Lieutenant Jonas Rell, her colleague and the ship's comms specialist, glanced up from his post across the room. His tone was casual, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. "The structure of this signal," Mira said, gesturing at the screen. "It's layered. There's the initial frequency, standard distress protocol. But beneath that, there's something else. Something alive, like it's trying to speak. Jonas pushed off his station and crossed the room, the hum of the ship's engines filling the space between them. He leaned over her shoulder, scanning the data. Maybe it's just an artifact of the encryption, he offered, but Mira caught the doubt in his voice. No, she said firmly. This is deliberate. Her finger traced a line of cascading waveforms on the screen. Listen closely. It's repeating but not identically. There are shifts, subtle changes, as if it's adapting to us. Jonas frowned. That's unsettling. Unsettling doesn't begin to cover it. Mira leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. For months, the Ardent Horizon had been conducting routine surveys of uncharted systems. The work was monotonous, an endless catalog of barren worlds and forgotten relics. But this signal had changed everything. It was the first thing in weeks to quicken her pulse, to stir the itch of discovery that had drawn her to the stars in the first place. Captain needs to hear this, Jonas said, his voice low. Mira nodded. And soon. The captain's quarters were dimly lit, a reflection of Captain Reyna Ardane's preference for muted spaces. Mira and Jonas stood side by side as the captain reviewed their findings, her sharp, calculating eyes narrowing with every passing second. This is old, Reyna said finally, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Far older than any distress signal we've encountered. And you're certain it's directed? Positive, Mira replied. The shifts in the sub-frequencies suggest intent, maybe even intelligence. Reyna leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. If this is deliberate, why hasn't anyone responded to it before? A signal this persistent should have drawn attention long ago. Mira hesitated, then spoke carefully. That's part of the mystery. Whoever sent this didn't want it to be found, not easily. The encryption is sophisticated, almost organic in its complexity. It's like they were hiding in plain sight. Jonas shifted uncomfortably. Hiding from what? Reyna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she rose and walked to the viewport, where the stars stretched endlessly before them. Plot a course toward the signal's origin, she said at last, and keep this off the main logs. We don't need to announce our intentions just yet. Mira felt a chill crawl up her spine. The captain's caution was warranted. This wasn't a discovery to be taken lightly. The journey to the signal's source was uneventful, but the tension aboard the Ardent Horizon was palpable. Every crew member felt the weight of the unknown, the unspoken questions that hung in the air. Mira spent hours in the lab, analyzing the signal, searching for patterns or clues. Finally, they arrived. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the crew was greeted by the sight of a planet shrouded in swirling clouds, its surface obscured by an impenetrable haze. Scans revealed an atmosphere rich in oxygen and nitrogen, habitable, yet eerily quiet. What are we looking at? Reyna asked as the bridge crew pored over the data. Mira stared at the readouts, her brow furrowed. I don't know, but the signal is strongest here. Whoever, or whatever, sent it is down there. Reyna nodded grimly. Prepare a landing team. And Mira, stay sharp. I have a feeling this planet isn't as lifeless as it seems. The descent was turbulent, the ship's hull groaning against the atmospheric pressure. When they broke through the clouds, the landscape came into view, a vast, verdant expanse, dotted with ruins that glimmered faintly in the dim light of the planet's twin suns. The landing site was a clearing near one of the larger structures, a monolithic spire that rose like a dagger against the sky. As the team disembarked, Mira felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of something unfamiliar. Stay close, Reyna ordered, her voice cutting through the stillness. The team advanced toward the spire, their boots crunching against the brittle foliage. As they neared the structure, Mira's scanner began to chirp. The signal, she said breathlessly. It's here. Before anyone could respond, the spire pulsed with a sudden burst of light, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. The team froze, weapons drawn, as a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing woman with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. "You should not have come," the figure said, her voice both commanding and mournful. The mystery deepened, and Mira felt the weight of it pressing down on her. Who were these people? What had brought them to this brink of extinction? And most importantly, what had they just stepped into? The silence following the woman's pronouncement was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the spire. Mira's mind raced as she took in the figure standing before them. The woman was undeniably alien, her proportions elongated and graceful, her skin's iridescent sheen catching the dim light like a living gemstone. Yet, there was something eerily familiar in her expression, a sorrow that mirrored the ache Mira had felt in the signal. Reyna stepped forward, her hand resting cautiously on her sidearm. "We received your transmission," she said firmly. "We've come to help." The alien woman's glowing eyes narrowed. "Help," she repeated, her voice carrying a trace of bitter amusement. "You do not understand what you offer." "Then help us understand," Mira interjected, stepping past Reyna before caution could stop her. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she met the woman's gaze. "That signal you sent, why now? Why after so many years of silence?" For a long moment, the alien said nothing. Then, with a deliberate grace, she turned and gestured for them to follow. "Come," she said. "If you truly wish to help, you must see." At the interior of the spire was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and chambers, each carved from a material that seemed to drink in the faint light. Strange symbols adorned the walls, their patterns shifting subtly as the team moved deeper into the structure. Mira couldn't shake the feeling that the spire was alive, its pulse resonating faintly beneath her feet. "Who are you?" Mira asked as they walked. "I am Kylenus," the woman replied without looking back, "a sentinel of my people." "And your people?" Reyna pressed. "Where are they?" Kylenus hesitated before answering. "Scattered, dwindling. We are all that remains of a once thriving race, the Clyara." The name sent a shiver down Mira's spine. She had heard whispers of the Clyara in old research logs, fragments of legends that spoke of a proud and enigmatic civilization. But those stories always ended in tragedy, with the Clyara fading into obscurity. "What happened to you?" Mira asked, her voice soft. Kylenus stopped abruptly and turned to face them. "We happened to ourselves," she said, her tone sharp with self-recrimination. "We sought to perfect our existence, to transcend the limits of nature. But we were blind to the cost. Now we pay the price." Her words hung heavy in the air, and Mira felt the weight of them settle in her chest. Kylenus led them to a vast chamber at the heart of the spire. The walls were lined with crystalline structures that pulsed faintly, their light reflecting off the smooth surface of a central dais. Atop the dais lay a single device, its design intricate and alien, yet strangely intuitive. "This," Kylenus said, gesturing to the device, "is the legacy of our hubris, the key to both our rise and our fall." "What does it do?" Jonas asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. Kylenus's expression darkened. "It was meant to safeguard our future, to ensure the survival of our people. Instead, it became our undoing. The very genetic code we sought to enhance was corrupted, unraveling slowly over generations. Now we stand on the brink of extinction." Mira approached the device cautiously, her scientific curiosity battling with a deep sense of foreboding. The intricate patterns etched into its surface seemed to shift under her gaze, as though alive. "Why send the signal now?" Reyna asked. "Why wait until you were on the edge of collapse?" Kylenus hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Pride," she admitted finally. "We believed we could solve this ourselves. But as our numbers dwindled, it became clear that we could not. So we called out, not to allies, for we have none left, but to the unknown, to those who might listen. And what do you want from us? Mira asked. Kylenus's eyes met hers, their glow dimming slightly. Your knowledge, your technology, perhaps even your genes. The weight of her words hit Mira like a physical blow. The Cleara weren't just seeking aid, they were seeking salvation. As they prepared to leave the spire, the tension among the crew was palpable. Jonas muttered to Mira as they descended the winding corridors. This feels wrong. We're walking into something way bigger than us. Mira nodded, but said nothing. Her thoughts churned with questions. Could they trust the Cleara? Was it even possible to help them without endangering themselves? As they stepped outside, the faint rustle of movement caught Mira's attention. She turned, scanning the tree line that bordered the clearing. Did you hear that? She asked, her voice low. Reyna raised a hand, signaling the team to halt. The group fell silent, their eyes scanning the shadows. Suddenly, a figure darted from the trees, another Clearan, his form lean and predatory. He moved with alarming speed, a weapon in his hand glinting in the sunlight. Kylenus stepped forward, her voice sharp. Hold, Orthanus. They are not our enemies. The man stopped, his weapon still raised, his eyes narrowing as he studied the humans. You bring outsiders here? He demanded, his voice a harsh rasp. After all we've suffered? They answered our call, Kylenus replied evenly. And we need them. Orthanus's gaze flicked between Mira and Reyna, suspicion etched into his features. Trusting them will destroy us, he spat. Mira felt a chill crawl up her spine. The Cleara weren't just desperate. They were divided. And that division could prove just as dangerous as the mystery they had come to unravel. Later, as Mira lay in her bunk aboard the ardent horizon, her mind refused to settle. The events of the day replayed endlessly, each detail raising more questions than it answered. What had truly caused the Cleara's genetic decay? Why had they waited so long to ask for help? And most troubling of all, what secrets were they still hiding? Sleep eluded her, and as the hours stretched on, one thought grew louder in her mind. Whatever lay ahead, it was only the beginning. The air on the planet felt heavier with each passing hour, like an unseen force pressing against Mira's chest. Despite her exhaustion, her mind churned with questions that refused to settle. The ardent horizon had become a nexus of tension, a place where hope and suspicion collided with every glance, every word. Mira stood in the ship's dimly lit lab, her gaze fixed on a holographic display of the Clearan genetic data. It was a chaotic tapestry of decay and brilliance, gene sequences that shimmered with complexity, yet unraveled in fragile strands the deeper she looked. Anything new? Reyna's voice broke the silence as she entered, her presence commanding even in the stillness. Mira turned, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. More questions than answers, she admitted. Their genome is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not just corrupted, it's engineered. Someone tampered with their DNA at a level I can barely comprehend. Reyna frowned. Are you saying this wasn't natural? Mira nodded slowly. Exactly. Whatever happened to the Cleara, it was done to them. The next day, the team returned to the spire. Mira had insisted on further investigation, her curiosity outweighing her unease. Kylenus was waiting for them, her serene demeanor masking an undercurrent of tension. We're going deeper today, Kylenus announced as they regrouped in the main chamber. There is something you must see. Orthanus appeared from the shadows, his expression as cold and sharp as the weapon at his side. This is a mistake, he growled. They are not ready. They must be, Kylenus replied, her tone brooking no argument. The descent was treacherous. The corridors narrowed, their walls lined with glowing veins of an unknown material that pulsed faintly, as though alive. The deeper they went, the more Mira felt an inexplicable pull, a sensation that tugged at her very being. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous chamber, its walls covered in the same shifting symbols they had seen before. In the center stood an enormous structure, a sphere suspended within a lattice of crystalline beams, its surface alive with shimmering patterns. "What is this?" Reyna asked, her voice hushed. Kalinis approached the sphere, her gaze distant. "This is the heart of the Cleara," she said, "the source of our strength, and our curse." As Kalinis began to explain, the chamber itself seemed to respond, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter. She spoke of the Cleara's ambition to transcend their natural limitations, of a device they had created to alter their genetic code and accelerate their evolution. "But we were reckless," Kalinis admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "The heart amplified our abilities, but at a cost we did not foresee. It introduced instability into our genome, a flaw that has grown worse with each generation. Now it threatens to consume us." Mira stepped closer to the sphere, her heart pounding. "If this is the cause of your decay, why haven't you destroyed it?" Kalinis's gaze turned sharp. "Because it is also the only thing keeping us alive. Without the heart, our degradation would accelerate exponentially. We would have no time left." The revelation hit Mira like a blow. The Cleara weren't just desperate, they were trapped in a vicious cycle, their salvation and destruction intertwined. Before they could delve deeper, a sudden commotion erupted from the far end of the chamber. Jonas, who had been standing watch, shouted a warning. A group of Clearans, armed and grim-faced, emerged from the shadows. "You have gone too far, Kalinis," their leader declared, his voice filled with righteous fury. "Bringing outsiders here is a betrayal of everything we stand for." "These outsiders are our last hope, Arak," Kalinis countered, her tone calm but firm. Arak's gaze swept over the humans, his expression filled with disdain. "They cannot be trusted. They will only take what they want and leave us to die." Tension crackled in the air as both sides braced for conflict. Reyna stepped forward, her hand resting on her weapon. "We're not here to harm you," she said. "But we can't help if we don't understand what's at stake." Arak sneered. "What's at stake is our survival, and I will not let you gamble with it." Before anyone could react, Arak raised his weapon and fired. The shot struck the sphere, sending a shockwave rippling through the chamber. The walls trembled, and the glowing symbols flared brightly, then dimmed. "What have you done?" Kalinis shouted, her voice filled with horror. The chamber plunged into chaos. The sphere began to emit a low, resonant hum, its patterns shifting erratically. Mira felt a sharp pain in her head, as though the very air around her was vibrating with an unbearable intensity. "Fall back," Reyna ordered, grabbing Mira's arm and pulling her toward the exit. They barely escaped as the chamber collapsed behind them, the sound of shattering crystal echoing through the spire. Once outside, the team regrouped, their breaths ragged and their faces etched with shock. Kalinis stood apart, her expression a mask of grief. "The heart has been destabilized," she said, her voice barely audible. "If it fails completely, we are finished." "Then we need to fix it," Mira said, her determination cutting through the despair. Kalinis looked at her, a flicker of hope mingling with doubt. "You don't understand. The heart is not merely a machine. It is connected to us, to our very essence. To repair it would require more than technology. It would require trust." Mira met her gaze, the weight of the challenge settling heavily on her shoulders. The Cleara's survival now depended not only on their knowledge, but on bridging the deep chasm of mistrust between their species. As the suns dipped below the horizon, casting the planet in a dim twilight, Mira realized that this was the turning point. They had stepped into a mystery far greater than they had imagined, and there was no turning back. The spire stood in solemn defiance of the chaos that had unfolded within its walls. Mira gazed at the structure from the safety of the camp, her mind replaying the catastrophe over and over. The heart's destabilization had not only brought the Cleara closer to extinction, but had also fractured what fragile trust existed between them and the humans. The team worked in tense silence. Equipment was spread across the clearing as they analyzed the data they had managed to extract from the heart before Iraq's reckless attack. Mira sifted through the results with trembling hands, her thoughts a storm of fear and determination. Anything? Reyna's voice cut through the quiet, steady but laced with impatience. Mira shook her head. The patterns are unlike anything I've seen before. It's like the heart isn't just technology, it's alive in a way. The Cleara weren't lying when they said it's tied to their essence. Then we're running out of time, Reyna said, folding her arms. Kylenis hasn't said much since we got back, but I can tell she's holding something back. Mira glanced toward Kylenis, who stood apart from the group, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Something in her posture seemed heavier now, as if she were bearing the weight of the entire planet's fate on her shoulders. Mira approached Kylenis cautiously, her footsteps soft against the alien soil. Kylenis, she began, her voice gentle but firm, there's more to this than what you've told us. If we're going to help, we need the full truth. Kylenis's eyes flickered with a faint glow as she turned to face Mira. For a moment, the alien woman said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. You are correct, Kylenis admitted. There is more. But the truth is dangerous. Dangerous for whom? Mira pressed. For all of us. Kylenis gestured for Mira to follow her to a secluded area away from the others. When they were alone, she began to speak, her voice low and deliberate. The heart was not merely a tool to enhance us. It was a gift. A gift, Mira echoed, her brow furrowing. Kylenis nodded. It was given to us by another race, long before your kind ever reached the stars. They called themselves the Calanthus, and they were more advanced than we could comprehend. They offered the heart as a means to elevate our species, to help us achieve what they called the next stage. What happened to them? Mira asked, her chest tightening. They vanished, Kylenis said, her gaze distant. Some say they ascended beyond the physical. Others believe they destroyed themselves. We never learned the truth, but their gift became our curse. The heart was never meant to be used recklessly, and we were too arrogant to see the warnings they left behind. Mira returned to the camp, with the revelation weighing heavily on her mind. The Calanthus's involvement added an entirely new layer to the mystery. Why had they chosen the Cleara, and what was the next stage they had spoken of? As the team debated their next steps, a sharp alarm sounded from the ship. Jonas rushed to the monitors, his face paling as he read the data. We've got a problem, he said. The heart's destabilization is affecting the entire planet. I'm picking up tectonic activity, quakes, magnetic anomalies, you name it. If it fails completely, the planet will tear itself apart, Reyna finished grimly. Mira's stomach sank. Their mission had turned from a desperate rescue to a race against time. Kylenis rejoined them, her calm demeanor now tinged with urgency. The heart can still be stabilized, she said, but it will require a direct interface. Someone must enter its core and re-establish the balance manually. Why not you? Reyna asked, her tone suspicious. Kylenis hesitated, her glowing eyes dimming. The heart is attuned to us, but our connection has degraded over time. It requires a fresh perspective, a mind that is untainted by our history. Mira felt the weight of Kylenis's gaze settle on her, and her heart skipped a beat. You're saying I have to do it? You are the only one who can, Kylenis said softly. The descent into the spire was a stark contrast to their first journey. The corridors were darker now, the faint pulse of the heart growing erratic. Mira led the way, her breath shallow as she tried to steady herself for what lay ahead. When they reached the heart's chamber, the sphere was a chaotic storm of light and sound. The once shimmering patterns on its surface now twisted and fractured, as if the device were tearing itself apart. Kylenis stepped forward, guiding Mira to a console that pulsed faintly at the base of the structure. This will link your mind to the heart, she explained. You must find the balance within its chaos and restore the stability we have lost. What happens if I fail? Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kailinus's silence was answer enough. As Mira placed her hands on the console, a surge of energy coursed through her body. The world around her dissolved into a blinding light, and she found herself standing in a vast, endless void. The heart's essence surrounded her, a maelstrom of memories and emotions that were not her own. She saw flashes of the Cleara's history, their rise to greatness, their fateful meeting with the Calanthus, and the slow, agonizing unraveling of their genetic code. Amidst the chaos, Mira felt the presence of something other, a consciousness that was vast and ancient, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice echoing in the void. The presence did not respond with words, but with a surge of images, fractured glimpses of the Calanthus, their experiments, and the realization that their gift to the Cleara had been a calculated test. The heart wasn't just a tool, it was a key, designed to unlock something buried deep within the Cleara's genetic code. But the Calanthus had underestimated the cost. Mira's focus wavered as the storm around her grew more intense. The heart's instability was threatening to overwhelm her. But then she remembered Kailinus's words, "Find the balance." Taking a deep breath, she reached out with her mind, searching for the patterns within the chaos. Slowly, she began to weave the fractured strands back together, aligning them into a harmonious rhythm. The effort was excruciating, every fiber of her being straining against the storm. But as the patterns began to stabilize, she felt a flicker of hope. Then, just as she thought she had succeeded, a voice whispered in her mind, soft and mournful, "You do not understand what you have awakened." The void shattered, and Mira was thrust back into reality, gasping for air. The heart had calmed, its light now a steady pulse. But the warning lingered in her mind, a chilling reminder that the mysteries of the Cleara and the Calanthus were far from over. The heart pulsed steadily now, its light casting soft shadows across the chamber. The once fractured patterns on its surface moved with fluid precision, weaving a tapestry that spoke of stability and fragile hope. Mira slumped against the console, her breath shallow as the weight of her actions settled in. She had stabilized the heart, but the warning that echoed in her mind remained a heavy shadow. Kailinus approached, her luminous eyes filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "You succeeded," she said softly, her voice carrying both gratitude and unease. "The heart is stable, for now." Mira nodded weakly. "But there's more to this, isn't there?" she asked, her gaze locking onto Kailinus. "The warning I heard, what is the heart really unlocking?" Kailinus hesitated, the truth evident in the tension of her shoulders. "The heart was always meant to awaken something within us," she admitted. "A dormant potential the Calanthus believed would transcend our physical limitations. But they underestimated the cost. That potential is not just power. It is a hunger, an unrelenting drive to consume and evolve. We feared what it might make of us, so we bound ourselves to the heart, using it to control the very potential it sought to unleash." Mira's stomach tightened. "And now?" Kailinus closed her eyes briefly. "Now we must decide if we continue to live in fear of what we might become, or if we embrace it and risk losing what we are." The descent into the depths of the Clearan mystery had strained the fragile alliance between the humans and the Cleara. Arak and his faction remained defiant, their mistrust of the outsiders unshaken. The Clearan elders convened in the spire's main chamber, their voices hushed but tense as they debated the path forward. "We cannot afford to gamble with our future," Arak declared, his voice sharp. "These humans have meddled enough. The heart's stability is fragile. Another misstep, and we may doom ourselves entirely. And without their help, we face extinction," Kailinus countered, her calm tone a stark contrast to his anger. "The heart is stable because of them. Deny that, and you deny our only chance at survival." Mira stepped forward, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "You don't trust us. I get that. But this isn't just about trust. It's about survival for both of our species. The heart has been stabilized, but its potential is still locked. You need to decide what you're willing to risk to save your people." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that could not be ignored. The days that followed were marked by uneasy cooperation. The humans worked alongside the Cleara, piecing together the remnants of their fractured history. As they delved into the archives, they uncovered long-hidden records of the Calanthus, encrypted messages, schematics, and fragments of their philosophy. Mira spent hours poring over the data, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and half-formed answers. The Calanthus had seen themselves as shepherds of evolution, but their arrogance had blinded them to the dangers of tampering with the fundamental nature of life. Late one night, as she studied a particularly intricate piece of code, a realization struck her. The heart wasn't just a key to unlocking the Cleara's potential. It was a mirror. It amplified and reflected the essence of those connected to it, shaping them in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. "Reyna!" Mira called out, her voice trembling with urgency. Reyna appeared moments later, her expression sharp. "What is it?" "The heart. It doesn't just unlock potential," Mira explained, her words spilling out in a rush. "It reflects who you are at your core. That's why the Cleara feared it. They saw the darkness within themselves magnified. But that also means they have the power to shape what they become." Armed with this revelation, Mira and Kalinis presented their findings to the elders. The room was silent as Mira spoke, her voice firm despite the weight of the moment. "You have a choice," she said. "You can continue to fear the heart and let it define you, or you can take control of it and define yourselves. This isn't just about survival. It's about who you want to be." The elders exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of hope and doubt. Finally, Kalinis stepped forward. "We have lived in the shadow of the heart for too long," she said. "It is time to step into the light, no matter how uncertain the path may be." The decision was made. The Cleara would embrace the heart's potential, but cautiously, with the guidance of their human allies. The process was painstaking, each step fraught with uncertainty. Mira worked tirelessly alongside Kalinis and the others, her determination unshaken despite the enormity of the task. As the heart's full power began to awaken, the Cleara underwent subtle but profound changes. Their once fragile bodies grew stronger, their senses sharper, but more importantly, their understanding of themselves deepened. They were no longer bound by fear. They had chosen to forge their own destiny. The weeks later, as the humans prepared to depart, Mira stood with Kalinis on the spire's summit. The twin suns cast a golden glow over the landscape, their light a promise of renewal. "You've given us more than we could have hoped for," Kalinis said, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "But this is only the beginning." Mira smiled, the weight of their journey easing slightly. "Just don't forget what you've learned. The heart may be powerful, but it's your choices that define who you are." Kalinis nodded, her luminous eyes reflecting the sun's light. "And your people? What will you tell them?" Mira's gaze shifted to the horizon. "The truth," she said, "that the Cleara aren't just survivors. You're a reminder of what happens when ambition and fear collide, and what it takes to rise above it." As the ardent horizon lifted off, Mira watched the spire shrink in the distance, a monument to resilience and renewal. The mysteries of the Calanthus still lingered, but for now the Cleara had found their path. And in their journey, Mira had found something too, a reminder that even in the face of the unknown, there was always hope.